Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies in hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth.
The 2nd century Gnostic Marcion denounced marriage as an evil and unchaste thing, and the followers of Tatian, called the Encratites or self-controlled, also rejected it, along with the eating of meat. Irenaeus and Tertullian opposed their unbiblical asceticism, but just as counterfeit scriptures blurred the lines between Gnostic and Orthodox on the subject of Mary, a 2nd century forgery called the Acts of Paul did the same in promoting Gnostic renunciations of food and marriage. The Apostle Paul had warned of forged letters in his own lifetime, but in spite of the book explicitly contradicting his known writings, it found a wide audience. It portrays incidents supposedly left out of the New Testament, such as Paul being thrown to lions in Ephesus, and the strongest lion assuming a posture of prayer and protecting him from the other beast. In recounting his beheading, it says his neck spurted milk instead of blood. In the story of Paul and Thecla, it has him echoing the Gnostics, saying, "You have no resurrection, unless you remain in chastity and pollute not the flesh." Thecla is presented as Paul's disciple, and a strikingly beautiful woman. She's repeatedly pressed to marry, but refuses to give up her virginity in the hope of obtaining that resurrection. Numerous attempts are made to execute her, and like the Proto-Evangelium, there are miracles on nearly every page. She is delivered from fire, lions, a bear, bulls, and even from man-eating seals. When Paul refuses to baptize her, she jumps in with the seals and baptizes herself. She somehow becomes an apostle and takes up residence in a cave. Other women flock to her to take up the ascetic life. She lives to the age of 90 on nothing but herbs and water. When men seek to rape her to rob her of her miracle-working ability, the mountain opens up and receives her and closes behind her. Despite contradicting the biblical Paul, like the Proto-Evangelium, this is what Eastern Orthodox call Holy Tradition.
St. John Chrysostom says of this wonderful Christian heroine and saint, "I seem to see this blessed Virgin going to Christ with sacred virginity in one hand and holy martyrdom in the other."
The Holy Church glorifies Thecla as the glory of women and guide for the suffering, opening up the way through every torment. From of old, many churches were dedicated to her, one of which was built at Constantinople by the holy equal to the apostles Constantine. The martyr Thecla, a prayerful intercessor for monks and nuns, is also invoked during the tonsure of women into monasticism.
Once again, it's not just modern Protestants who say that this is a counterfeit. About the year 200, Tertullian wrote,
"If the writings, which wrongly go under Paul's name, claim Thecla's example as a license for women's teaching and baptizing, let them know that, in Asia, the presbyter who composed that writing, after being convicted and confessing that he had done it, was removed from his office."
Some will point to Ambrose, Chrysostom, and Augustine, referring to Thecla as if this proves her historicity. But these men were writing 3 centuries after Paul's death, and mysticism was blurring the lines between fact and fantasy. Their contemporary, the monk Martin of Tours, is described as going days without food or sleep and seeing visions. He said, "Agnes, Thecla, and Mary were there with me. Peter also and Paul, the apostles, were frequently seen by him. Moreover, he was in the habit of rebuking the demons by their special names, according as they severally came to him. He found Mercury a cause of special annoyance, while he said that Jupiter was stupid and doltish." Besides Thecla, there are a host of other such Orthodox saints whose stories are also demonstrable fictions. The feast day for Saints Barlaam and Josaphat is August 26 for the Greeks, and November 19th for the Slavic churches. Their story is historically attributed to John of Damascus, and says that the king of India was told by an astrologer that his son Josaphat would become a Christian. He tried to prevent this by sheltering him from the world, keeping him in a palace surrounded with pleasures. One day, Josaphat went out and saw a leper and a cripple and then later an old man. After being confronted by disease and death, he met the monk Barlaam, who explained that baptism and a life of asceticism were his only hope.
If we should fortune to fall into any transgression, there is, it is true, no second regeneration made within us by the Spirit through baptism in the water of the font, and wholly recreating us. That gift is given once for all, but by means of painful repentance, hot tears, toils, and sweats, there is a purifying and pardoning of our offenses through the tender mercy of our God.
Josaphat became a Christian, and soon his father did as well. He gave up being king to become a monk. Josaphat eventually gave up the throne as well, and lived out the last of his days as a monk in the desert with Barlaam. Their graves were said to have become famous for miracles. Like Thecla, churches were named for these saints, and their story is included in the church's hymns. Relics were brought from India and enshrined in cathedrals, but later contact with India led many to recognize this was simply a reworking of the legend of Buddha. It was a baptizing of pagan asceticism and contradicted all known history. Rome has dropped Thecla, Barlaam, and Josaphat from its official list of saints, but Orthodoxy hasn't. In fact, it calls Thecla equal to the apostles. What we have in her story is the emergence of saints whose lives are less like Elijah and John the Baptist than they are those of the pagan mystics. In India, even today it's considered by many a mark of supreme holiness to never touch someone of the opposite sex and to literally starve yourself to death. This isn't biblical piety, but it was the piety of the Christian monastics.